As we honor the memory and legacy of Bob Weir this morning here on WDAHA on All Mixed Up, I wanted to bring in my next guest, who is Jeff Tamarkin, noted rock journalist. You've been reading him for years all over the place. Cream, Relix, Goldmine, bestclassicrockbands.com right now is where I see you the most, Jeff. Good morning and welcome here to WDAHA.
Thanks so much for having me.
There's a story I want to start with, and you'll be able to tell it so much better than I can. It's the summer of 1971. You're driving from New York across Canada,
Right.
and you say to a friend, let's go visit the dead.
Uh-huh. It actually happened. Yeah. We, my friend and I drove across Canada, made a left at Vancouver, um, headed down the West Coast and pulled into the Bay Area, I guess midday, I don't know what day, the week or anything like that. And we didn't have a place to stay or anything. We were just winging it. And I don't remember which one of us said, "Hey, why don't we go visit the dead?" Sure, okay. We had the address of their headquarters in San Rafael, Marin County. So, took out the old paper map long before we had GPS and found the place and pulled over on the side. It's just her house in a residential area. And looked across the street at this house, and there's Jerry Garcia standing in the driveway talking to some guy. So we kind of looked at each other and said, "Now what do we do?" And my friend Richie said, "Hey, what about that bootleg album that we brought with us? It's in the trunk." So, oh yeah. So we opened up the trunk, pulled out this very early Grateful Dead vinyl bootleg album that had recordings of the band from various locations. Walked across the street and said, "Hey Jerry, we just drove across the country to see you. Want to hear this bootleg album?" And Jerry looked at us and said, "Sure, come on in." And that was it. For the next couple of hours, we went upstairs into a room that had an amazing sound system and put this recording on and listened to it. And at various points throughout the afternoon, other members of the Dead would walk in the room and go, "What's that?" Or, "Oh," and including Bob Weir, who listened to a live acoustic version of El Paso, the Marty Robbins song that he often did. And he kind of laughed and shook his head and walked back out of the room. And it was just a really memorable thing to happen on. This was my first, time in the Bay Area. And literally that was the first place we went.
You've written books on Santana, the Jefferson Airplane. How does a
Mhm.
kid from Brooklyn get so immersed into that West Coast sound?
Yeah. I mean, I was into the West Coast sound before the San Francisco part of it. There was all that great stuff coming out of LA, the Beach Boys and the Mamas and the Papas and all that. And come 1967, I guess I heard Somebody to Love by the Airplane on the radio, and it just really hit me. And then fuck you, they followed that up with White Rabbit. And the more I looked into what was going on in San Francisco, and I actually heard about groups like the Dead and Quicksilver Messenger Service and Big Brother and the Holding Company with Janis long before I ever heard their music. But I just sort of knew that this was something that would speak to me. And sure enough, once I started buying the albums by these groups, it was all I really wanted to hear at the time. And one by one, started to see some of these bands in concert. And my first Dead concert was at Fillmore East in January of 1970. And before that year was over, I'd seen them probably a dozen times.
For me, it was the short form songs, as
Hmm.
Bob Lefsetz said in his recent column that
Right.
you referenced on your Facebook page the other day. It was the short form songs,
Hmm.
stuff on American Beauty, Working Man's Dead.
Yeah,
Those were the songs that spoke to me first about the Grateful Dead.
sure. They're often characterized as a jam band, and that's a big part of what they did. They did jam. They would often take a song and expand it and improvise within it. Those jams might last 2 or 3 minutes. They might go on for a half hour. Uh, and that's part of the charm of who they were and what they were doing. And that whole improvisational approach to songs and really marked their whole career because not only did they improvise within a song, their set list was never the same twice. They really took it as it came. They would, get feedback from an audience and decide where to go with their show. And, that was the joy of going to see a band like that maybe 5 nights in a row because you would never see the same show twice. So, but you're right. And now I find that I'm more interested in those short form songs than I am listening to the improvisational jams. That's what really hits home with me now. They were great songwriters, and Jerry with Robert Hunter and Bobby with John Perry Barlow. They came up with some really timeless stuff, and I find that the older I get and the more I listen to this ancient music, it actually means more to me now than it did at the time.
You mentioned that, songs extending into 30-minute periods. There's a live broadcast that I remember, Jeff, in the fall of
Yeah.
1977, Grateful Dead at Englishtown Raceway.
Uh-huh.
And I was in my dorm room at Fordham University in the Bronx
Uh-huh.
and listening to the broadcast. I fell asleep. I woke up 30 minutes later. They were playing the same
Yeah,
song.
that's very possible. And, it wasn't a big part of what they did. What they would do is, especially in the second set of each show, they would basically a lot of times turn their songs into one big medley. They would mix things in ways that you wouldn't expect, and rather than take breaks between songs, one song would lead into another, and that was part of the genius of what they did, that they were so tuned into one another's playing that they could sort of intuit where other members of the band were going to go. And it might be something like Dark Star, which habitually did go on for 25, 30, maybe 40 minutes. But it could also be some of the shorter things, like some of the covers they did, Chuck Berry to Merle Haggard and so many other things. They would take the song as it is and sort of make it into their own.
There have been tributes pouring out from all over the place in the wake of the passing of Bob
Yeah.
Weir, from people like Brandy Carlisle, which I did not expect. Bruce
Mm,
Hornsby, I kind of expected. John Mayer, of course.
yeah.
There was something you may have even seen this, Ari Melber on MS Now
Mm,
the other night. It did a really nice extended piece on Bob Weir and the Grateful Dead. And he had seen the Dead a number of times,
yeah.
including before Jerry's passing. And one of the things that he pointed out, Jeff, and we
Mm,
could say this about a number of artists from the 60s who still continue their music, if not their own musicianship these days, but it was an intergenerational appeal
mhm.
that the Grateful Dead had, much the way like the Rolling Stones continue, the way the Beatles music continues to live on.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me is that even after Jerry Garcia died in 1995, they had a 30-year run and then they had another 30-year run without him. And, it's fair to say that most of the people that have seen the newer incarnations, the Jerry list dead, were not around when he played, let alone got to see him. You go to a show and whether it's Dead and Company or Further or any of the other many names they used afterwards, and you see a lot of 20-year-old people or college age people, and they missed the entire first run. So they really had a very different take on what it was all about. But on the same token, there were some things that never changed, and the way the music spoke to people and affected people, I think that was consistent throughout from 1965 up until the very end, which sadly we've now reached.
With the passing of Bob Weir, what do you think happens musically with the Dead, whatever the form
Yeah.
they chose to call them, choose to call themselves, excuse me?
Yeah, good question. I really don't know. I don't know if they know. There are three original members of, not all original, one original member left from the Dead, and that's Bill Kreutzmann, one of the two drummers. Two other members, Mickey Hart and keyboardist Tom Constantin, who was there in the very early years. They're still with us. Not all of them are still playing, so I think it's really going to be up to these people that inherited, the love for this music, like John Mayer, and there's so many tribute bands out there that approach it from different angles, and that music itself will carry on. It may not be with the people that made that music originally, but I think for the foreseeable, who knows how many years and decades, there will always be an audience for Grateful Dead music, whether those people are on the stage or not.
I think John Mayer is on a very short list of guitar players who could come in and do something that would carry the legacy of this band moving forward.
Yeah. I never got to see Dead and Company, but I've heard a lot of their music and seen videos, and he does a good job. He does a good job of recreating the touch and the feel of Garcia. To me personally, it ended in 1995, but that's just me. More power to those who are still going to see them and enjoying it, and I hope they still have that outlet because I think it's an important part of the culture. And it's obviously spoken to a lot of millions of people over the years. So we'll see what happens.
Jeff Tamarkin, thank you so much for your time and sharing thoughts and memories of Bob Weir and the Grateful Dead this morning here on WDHA. I've enjoyed chatting with you.
Thanks. Same here.